Hey guys, xin chào các bạn. Hola amigos y amigas. In today's video, I'm going to explain step by step on how to create a palindrome checker, which is the first project for freeCodeCamp's JavaScript algorithms and data structures. So my final version of the project looked like this. A palindrome is a word or a sentence that spelled the same way both forward and backwards, ignoring punctuation, case, and spacing. So for example, if I typed in I Vu Dang here, this would not be a palindrome because it is not the same when it's spelled backwards. However, if we typed in, for example, I, this would be a palindrome because it's the same when it's spelled forwards and backwards. We can also try race car, so race car. This would also be a palindrome because it is spelled the same way forwards and backwards. So via your discretion, there are various ways that you can solve a coding problem. However, for the purpose of this video, I will break down the solution that I enjoyed the most, which is the one that I found concise, easy to read, easy to follow, and easy to understand. So therefore, the solution I cover is not necessarily the most sophisticated solution, aka the one that the computer might find most efficient. My workflow for this project will consist of 5 phases. First is the JavaScript coding to complete the project itself. Second is to draft the design and user interface so that a user or a human can interact with the JavaScript. Third is the minimal HTML to see if we can plug our JavaScript into the web page and see if it works. The fourth phase is the JavaScript coding to integrate our JavaScript into our HTML. And then the fifth phase is combining HTML and CSS into our JavaScript to make it into something presentable. I'll add the timestamps for each of the phases in the video description below, so you can click and skip to certain parts of the video for your convenience. So our problem starts out like this. JavaScript algorithms and data structures. First project, the Palindrome Checker. So the solution I'm going to cover in this video is actually the first one. If you click on Get Help, Get a Hint, it brings us to this page, Solution 1. So I will explain line by line for this one first, and then I'll show you guys a modified version of the solution that I think is slightly more organized. So I'll type out the code first in CodePen, and then we can break it down line by line afterwards. The reason why I'm using CodePen is I find it more easier to write the comments versus in the FCC screen. So we'll write the code in CodePen first, and then we'll just copy and then paste it into here, and then check to see if it works. So for the first solution, a high-level outline is that we're just creating 2 versions of the string, stripping away all the non-alpha numeric characters, and then we'll compare with our equal sign, aka the strictly equal operator, to see if those 2 versions are the same. So let's write out our code first. We'll call this method 1, function palindrome check 1, round bracket str, round bracket, curly bracket, return, round bracket, str dot replace, round bracket, dash, square bracket, back dash, capital W underscore, square bracket, yeah, and then dash, lower g, comma, quotation, and then close the round bracket, yeah, and then dot to lower case, round brackets, and then 3 equal signs, str dot replace, and then we'll just copy this, then we'll also copy the dot to lowercase up here. So this is the first version of our string, and then we're just creating our second version right here. And then for our second version, we'll just add a couple more methods to it. So dot split, round bracket, quotation, round bracket, dot, reverse, quotation, quotation, and then dot, join, and then round bracket, quotation, quotation, and then semicolon to indicate that this one's done. And then now let's test it. Test example. Console.log palindrome check 1, and then we'll do race car underscore, and this should return, it should return true. And then we'll also do one that's false. So console.log palindrome check 1, quotation I vu underscore dang. This should return false. So if we click run, if we click console down here, that should bring up our console screen. Clear, and then we'll run it again. So true, false. So this correlates to these two over here, and then if we just copy and paste this back to our screen, run the test. Turn true if a palindrome is a word or sentence. You need to use car. Oh, so maybe it wants us to name the function palindrome. So let's just delete this, and it should work. Okay, so let's break this solution down line by line. So in line one, we create a function where we can input a string, and then perform following to set string. So in line two, this return statement essentially will output a Boolean value based on the triple equal sign operator, which is the strictly equal operator, true or false. And then in line three, this is the first version of the string. It deletes all the non-alpha numeric elements and lowercases the remaining characters. So for example, if we put in I vu dang, the result will look like this, I vu dang. So the dot replace with this dash, square bracket, and then backdash capital W underscore essentially is the method that deletes all the non-alpha numeric elements. So so that capital W removes all the capital letters A to Z, as well as the lowercase A to Z, and as well as the numeric numbers 0 to 9. And then the underscore here will find all the underscores and replace or remove them as well. And then the dot to lowercase will lowercase the remaining characters after those have been removed. So in this second section of our code is the second version of the string that we're creating to compare with our first version up here. So we'll call this line 4, second version, aka the reversed version. And then in line 5, as mentioned before, it deletes all non-alpha numeric elements. And then line 6, this lowercases the remaining characters. Line 7 splits the characters into elements within an array because strings are immutable, cannot be altered. So the reason why we need to split it first is because as a string, you can't modify, so the string is considered immutable, so it cannot be modified. So therefore, we have to implement the method split first before we can reverse the elements inside the string. And then after we reverse or we modify those elements and reverse them, then we can join it again to make it back into a string. So in line 8, that's essentially what we're doing. Line 8, and then we can reverse the elements within the array. So it'll look like this, square bracket, G, comma, N, comma, A, comma, D, D, comma, U, comma, B, and then comma, I. Dang. Yeah, so the split will make it look into something like this. So instead of one word where there's a quotation at the beginning at the end, each letter will now have a quotation beside it. And then for the next one, line 9, quotation, line 9, and then convert it back into a string. So now the dot join, quotation will GNADUVI. So the dot split would have caused each of the letters to be separated like this. However, the dot join will now link it back together as one string after we reversed it. So like Ibudang reversed would be GNADUVI. Yeah. So since at the very beginning so all of this occurs within the return statement. So essentially in our return statement, we did a comparison between this first version of the string versus the second version. So at the very end, therefore, Ibudang, in summary, it'll look like this in terms of what's occurring. GNADUVI. So because the first version of the string is Ibudang, and then you use the comparison operator to compare it against our second version of the string, which is this one, GNADUVI, the result would then be false, which is what is happening in our console log down here. So just to summarize, high-level outline, we created two versions of the string, stripping away all non-alpha numeric characters, and then we compared with the 3 equal signs aka strictly equal operator to see if they are the same. And then star dash star. So let's gray method one out, and I'll show you guys the second method on how to write code that looks a little bit more organized. So we'll gray this one out, and let's call this one method 2. So I'll write out the code first, and then we can explain it line by line afterwards. So we'll call this function Palindrome Check 2, and then round bracket str, round bracket, curly bracket, const, we'll call non-alpha num equals to dash, square bracket, backdash, capital W underscore, close with a square bracket, and then dash G, and then semicolon to end the line, and then let, we'll call this first version equals to str dot to lowercase, round brackets, and then dot replace, round brackets, non-alpha num, comma, and then quotation, quotation, and the line with semicolon. Let reversed version equals to first version dot split, round bracket, and then quotations dot reverse, round brackets, dot join, round brackets, quotation, quotation, and then semicolon to end the line, and then return reverse version equal 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 sign, first version, and then end the line with semicolon, and we'll close with a curly bracket. And then we'll also do the same test, this example, and then run. Where did I go wrong here? Palindrome, oh, so change it to Palindrome Check 2. Clear, let's run it again. Okay, cool, so it returns the same result, true and false. We can also test it in our FCC, so we'll copy this and then we'll paste it back in here. So just remember, FCC wants you to just call the function palindrome, so we'll delete the check up here, palindrome, and then run the test. So yeah, so the modified version also works. So I'll explain it now. So high level, essentially what we did is we created 3 variables. The constant, so these are variables here. This is our first variable, this is our second variable, this is our third variable. So instead of putting or writing the capital W, like instead of writing the script that finds all the non-alpha numeric characters into the line, or yeah, into the line, we could just create a variable where we can reference it. And then down here, so we use constant because this won't change. We will always want to, we will always be able to reference to this constant. And then down here, we created 2 variables. The first variable, first version, is just the first version of the string. And then the second one is the second version of the string. And then at the very bottom, essentially, we just did the return statement between the two versions, the 2 variables. So the reverse version, which is this one here, compared it against the first version, which is this one here. Okay, so let's start explaining line 3. So I'll start my comment section first. Dash star, and then close with star dash. So line 3, we created our first version of the string where we converted all elements to lowercase and removed all non-alpha numeric characters. So the dot replace non-alpha num, comma, quotation, quotation. So non-alpha num just refers to this expression here, and we just essentially squeezed, instead of writing this out in here, it's just more shorter and concise to refer to a variable and then just place it in here. So the syntax for dot replace syntax is dot replace round bracket, so find value, and then comma, and then the second portion is the new value. So it will find all non-alpha numeric characters, comma, and then when it does find it, it will replace the non-alpha numeric characters with, so quotation, quotation without a space inside essentially means nothing. It will replace it with nothing, which just means that it deletes it. So we referenced back to our variable constant non-alpha num to find all current non-alpha numeric characters and replaced it with quotation, quotation, or sorry, this is a single, it's called a single quotation, meaning whatever was found was replaced with nothing, aka deleting the element. String dot to lowercase round brackets. Essentially, if our example was ivu dang, it would have made it look like this, ivu underscore dang. So the capital V and the capital D would have just converted to lower letters, and then dot replace non-alpha num, comma, single quotation. This would have converted it to ivu dang with no spaces and no underscores. So it would have looked like this. So this would have first converted it to all lower cases, and then in the dot replace method, it would have removed all spaces, underscores, and just any sign symbols in general. Okay, and then moving on to line 4. This is where we created our second, or the reversed version of the string, where we took our first version and applied it. We applied a few more methods to it. So in our first version of the string, we already converted it to lowercase and we removed all the non-alpha numeric characters. So in our second version, in our second instance where we create a variable called reverse version, we'll just take our we'll just refer to our first variable where we have already applied these two methods, and then we will just apply some additional methods to it. That way we don't have to write out this entire string again in our, sorry, not string, this entire, what do you call it, script, this entire script in our second variable. We'll just refer to the first variable, and then we'll just add our new methods to it. So where was I? Line 4. Okay. So first version takes our modified string earlier that has been converted to all lowercase and has all non-alpha numeric characters removed. And then dot split round bracket, and then single quotation. So this will creates new array with all characters in the string separated into single characters. So it will look like quotation I, comma, quotations B, oops, comma, quotations U, comma, quotations D, comma, quotations A, comma, quotations N, comma, quotations G, comma. So the dot split will, similar to in our first method, separate all the letters into items within like a separate item within the array, separate element within the array. And then dot reverse, round brackets, this will reverse the order of the elements in an array. So all the elements here within the array, it will just go backwards. So I just copy this up here and then paste it here. So it will look like that. So all the elements are essentially now the order of it will reverse. And then dot join round bracket, and then single quotation. This will convert an array of elements into one string. So similar to above, it's going to produce this result. So rather than the letters being separate items within an array, the dot join round brackets, single quotations, will convert it into one string, and it will look like that if our example was Abu Dang. And then we have one last line. So in line 5, reversed version equal first version. This is essentially, if our example was Abu Dang, then it'll be Abu Dang so our first version is here, and then our second version is this. And since it does not look the same, it's not equal to each other, it will produce false. So moving on to the second phase of our workflow is where I would have drafted my idea of the interface and design on a piece of paper like so. So just like drawing it out, sketching it out, and kind of just giving me a high-level idea of what the end product should look like. And I kind of showed the preview of that at the beginning of this video. So then moving on to the third phase of our workflow is to write the minimal HTML to see if we can plug our JavaScript function into the web page to see if it works. It acts like the skeleton. So we'll minimize this, and then we'll drag down our HTML, and we can start writing the minimal code to test our JavaScript. Just good convention to make sure that something is inputted, and then arrow dash input arrow to close, and then just to write a comment to indicate that this is one of the essential HTML lines. So arrow exclamation mark dash dash core dash dash arrow. It's just something I like to do, just to kind of help remind me that this is one of the essential lines. And then The second thing we want to create is the submit button. So after a user does write something, we want to be able to submit and test it. So right now I have it on run, but let's just change our settings to enable auto updating so you guys can see it in real time what occurs over here. So this first string created this box for us to type our word. And then the next thing we're going to create is our submit button. So arrow and then input ID equals to, so let's call this one submit button so that we can reference it later in both CSS and JavaScript. And then our type will be equal to quotation submit. So this type will create the button, which is, you can see here. And then the value equals to quotation is check now. Check now. So the value will modify the text inside the submit button. So as you can see, it now has updated to check now, which connects to this. And then class equals to submit dash button quotation and then arrow. So class is optional. ID, if we can reference ID in both CSS and JavaScript. However, if you want to, I don't know, for example, reference ID in JavaScript and then use class for CSS, that's okay too. Let's just leave that for now. And then we'll write a comment here to also indicate that this is also an essential HTML, like our core skeleton. How come this didn't phase into comments? Oh, I forgot to put a quotation here, and then also close it with dash input arrow. And then the next thing we want to create, well, this is optional. So I also wanted to create like a notification. So once you do input it, like I want the HTML page to kind of like notify, oh, is this a palindrome, or if it's not a palindrome. So to do that, we'll create a division. We'll give it an ID as well so we can reference it in our JavaScript. Notification, quotation, and then arrow, and then close with arrow dash div arrow. And then we'll also copy and paste this to indicate that it is also part of our core test. And then BR will add a vertical space, or a vertical space. And then arrow div will give this an ID. And then the next thing I also want to add is like a notification. So our first one is a notification to indicate whether it is or it's not a palindrome. And then the fourth script that I want to write is, how the word looks like forward and backwards, just to kind of make it more clear for the user. So that's why I'm writing another division element. So for this one, we'll give it we'll call it a display word as the ID, and then close it with arrow dash div arrow, and then copy and paste this. Cool. So this is essentially all we need to test our JavaScript. This is the core and the minimal HTML needed. So let's proceed on to the fourth stage where we write the JavaScript code to integrate into our HTML, or to kind of sync between JavaScript function to the HTML page. Okay, so moving back into our JavaScript window, just right below our JavaScript function, I'll create a comment to show that we're starting to write our web API here. So start web API, So this just means that this is where we're going to start writing the code to implement this JavaScript function up into our HTML. So start web API and also copy and paste n web API, n web API, and then in between we can start writing our code. So I'm going to write out the code first, and then I can explain line by line afterwards. So let's call web API JavaScript to HTML. Let submit. Oops. Let submit button. Sorry, I'm just gonna, cause like right now we have it on auto update. Usually in JavaScript, I like to change the settings so that it doesn't auto update, and then that way it won't like spam. It won't spam in this console window. Clear. Okay, and then it will only run when we click run. Let submit button equal to document dot get element by ID, round bracket, quotation, submit button, quotation, and then semicolon. So this submit button refers to our input up here, submit button. And then submit. So now we'll write instructions for our variable up here. Let's call this submit button event. So submit button event dot add event listener, round bracket, quotation, click, quotation, and then comma, function, round brackets, and then curly bracket, and then single quotation, use strict, single quotation, semicolon. So this just is just good convention to essentially, this just detects errors. We'll explain a little bit more later. Variable, we'll call this value equals to document dot get element by ID, round brackets, and then quotation input string dot value semicolon. So input string here refers to our ID up here, our text box in the HTML. So just as a high level, we first created a variable called submit button event, which retrieves information from our HTML submit button up here, and then so it retrieves information for the event of hitting that submit button, and then down here we're writing further instructions on what happens when we do hit that submit button. So submit button event period dot add event listener. So now we're writing, okay, once we do click that button, what's going to happen? How will JavaScript express itself in HTML as information is flowing in from, you know, clicking the submit button. Okay, and then next is we'll create another variable called notification equals to document.get element by ID, round brackets, quotation, notification, quotation, and then semicolon. So notification here refers to our division element in HTML up here. And then we'll create another variable display word equals to document.get element by ID, round bracket, quotation, display word, and then end the line with semicolon. And then display word here refers to our division element up here with ID display word and HTML. And then after we created these variables, we'll write a if statement. So if palindrome check2 round brackets value and then curly brackets. So palindrome check2 is the name of our function. This essentially just refers back to our function up here. So this is how we integrate the function into our web API code down here. So if the palindrome, or if the function, and then our input the value here, and then we'll write the, if it's true or if it's false script following. So notification. So in this first segment that I'm writing, it's going to be if it's true. So notification dot inner HTML. So notification, this refers to our variable up here. And now we're just going to write instructions on how it's going to be displayed. So notification dot inner HTML equals to quotation backdash quotation. So this backdash just means exiting. So this just is to show the quotation at the beginning. So just like as a string, it just wants to show quotation on its own. I'll show you guys and explain after. It's a bit confusing. So let's just write the code out first. Value dot toString round brackets, and then plus quotation backdash quotation, and then plus I think backtick, and then space. So this would just create a space. Plus backtick is a palindrome. So for strings, you can use double quotations, single quotations, or backticks. I think it's better convention to use backticks because there's more flexibility and there's more adjustment opportunity when using backticks versus double quotations. There's certain restrictions to it. We can go into detail about that maybe in another video. Anyway, okay, it's a palindrome, and then exclamation mark, close with backtick, and then semicolon. Okay, and then we also want to, so this first line just is to show, oh, is this where, if it's true, this word is a palindrome. However, we also want to display the word displayed forward and backwards. So this second line is essentially going to do that. So display word, and display word refers to the variable up here, which refers to the division element in HTML up here. So display word dot inner HTML equals to backtick forwards colon, and then add value. So for the display word segment, we can essentially just copy the script that we wrote earlier. So dot to, essentially the display word segment is just to show how the word looks like forward and backwards. So we wrote that script up here where the first version is it going forward, and then the second version was it going backwards. So we'll just copy the very end, dot to lowercase and dot to replace. So we'll copy this, and behind value, so value refers to our input here. So whatever input you put into the function, it will apply these methods to it. And also we have to remove our non-alpha variable, because this is right now it's stored within this function, so it's a local variable. So rather than referring to the variable, we just copy this entire, what do you call it? This statement? No, not statement. This expression, and then we'll paste it in here. Okay. And then we also want to show, so plus arrow, plus quotation, arrow, BR, arrow, and then close of quotation. So this will add the vertical spacing, and then plus backtick backwards, colon, backtick. And then next we want to show the word how it looks like if it was going backwards. So what we can do is just copy this and then paste it over here. And then also going back to our function up here, we'll copy the rest of the methods in our second variable. So in our second variable where we reversed the word, we'll just take those methods and then we'll paste it down here. So that will show the word backwards. And then end with semicolon. And then curly bracket to close our first segment. So our first segment is if the function results in true. So now else, and then curly bracket. So the second segment is if it's false. So we'll just copy. You know what we can do? We can just copy this entire thing. We'll copy this first segment and then we'll just make adjustments to it. So this will change it to is not a palindrome. It's not a palindrome. Or I guess we can leave the exclamation mark. And then it should be fine to leave this one alone, because like we essentially just want to show what the word looks like forward and backwards. And then we closed with a curly bracket, I think. So this will close this one, and then this one will close the one up here. What else am I missing? Oh, so we just need to close. We need to close this with a round bracket and then end with semicolon. And I think that should work. Let's delete some spaces. Okay, and then we run. Oh, you know what? Here we did 2 periods. Let's delete this and see if that will work. We'll clear and then run again. Syntax error. Ah, shoot. We also had double periods here. So delete and delete. Okay, let's just take another quick scan. If there's any other double periods. No, there shouldn't be. Okay, let's run it. Okay, cool. We'll also test our HTML. I'm gonna drag this down. And then we'll type in I. Check now. It's not a function. Is it because I didn't capitalize these ones by and then change this B into a capital B? Clear. Run. I. Oh, there we go. So yeah, that's also another consideration. Make sure JavaScript is sensitive to lower caps and what do you call it? Large caps. So if you made it this far, congrats. We are on the 5th phase of the project, which is adding HTML and CSS to our JavaScript to make our project look more friendly and more presentable. So this should be the more fun phase of the project. Okay, so let's change our view because we're going to mainly work in HTML and CSS. I think it will be more easier to work in the horizontal view. So we'll minimize this JavaScript screen and we'll just leave our CSS and our HTML screens open. And the first thing we can do is we can start from our core script and then work or expand it. So let's write a comment here. Start body and then dash dash arrow and then end. Also indicate the end as well. So whoops, exclamation mark dash dash end body dash dash arrow, and then body up here, and then we'll close with arrow dash body arrow down here. So this is the start and then this is the end of the body, and then within our body is the main script. And then what we can do next is, I think, oh sorry, let's move this up a bit. It would be more organized and neat if we placed these elements like the, what do you call it? The text box and the submit button and these display notifications into a grid so everything is aligned. So what we can do is we can place these into a container, aka a division class equals to body, we'll call it body grid, and then we'll reference this in CSS later to format it into a grid. So we'll call that body grid, and then we also want to make sure to close it. So arrow dash div down here. Okay, cool. And then we'll also place our text box into a container. So let's do div class equals to text underscore box quotation arrow, and then we also want to close it. So arrow dash div arrow. Whoops, here we go. And then we'll also place this, what do you call it? The submit button into a container as well. So div class equals to quotation submit underscore button quotation, and then we'll close this with arrow and then close with div down here, arrow dash div. Okay. And then these we can leave alone. And then we can format these in CSS. So let's do that. Dash star, and then whoops, start input format here. Star dash, and then also copy this and then paste it down here, and then we can start writing our CSS in between these. So the first one we want to format is this one here, ID input string. So just remember, for IDs you want to start with hashtag, and then for classes you start with period. So the way I remember it is, for IDs, like when you go to work, for example, in like a corporate building or something, you usually have that usually have a ID card, right? And then the ID card would have hashtag and then numbers behind it. So ID, so ID card, hashtag. So that's how I remember how they, what do you call it, go together. So hashtag goes with ID, and then for classes in HTML to format in CSS, you start with period, because in high school, for example, you would have class periods. That's what we call like, what do you call it? On your schedule, like, you know, your class period. So that's how I remember it. So anyway, hashtag input string. So this refers to our text box. Input string. Oh, let me change the settings so you guys can see it like update in real time. So hashtag input string, squiggly array, and then display block, whoops, semicolon, and then width 100%, height equals to 2 rem, colon 2 rem. Although we put width 100% here, later we'll format the body section a certain amount of width. So this will be placed within another container later. So right now it covers the entire screen, but just later in the video you'll see that I'll place this within essentially the body CSS that we'll write later will contain this in a smaller frame. And then padding colon 0.25 rem, 0.75 rem, semicolon, background color, hashtag FFF, semicolon, and then border 1px solid, hashtag dd4da, border dash radius 0.25 rem, semicolon, and then close the bracket. So border radius will just round out the edges or round out the corners. Border will give it, yeah, a border. Background color will be FF is white, and then padding will just give it some spacing in between the word and the edge of our what do you call it? Our text box. And then let's format our submit button. So because our submit button started with ID, we in CSS will start with hashtag. So hashtag submit button. So this ID here agrees to here, submit button, and then curly bracket width equals to 100%. And again, because we'll apply a body format later, this width 100% will just be the 100. It'll be within another container, so it'll only spread out to the container that we'll set later. So just hang on, and then I'll show you guys later. Height auto semicolon padding colon 0.75 rem semicolon, and then background, let's do royal blue, semicolon, color of the font will be white, semicolon, and then border radius will be 5px, semicolon, and then cursor will be pointer. So cursor just kind of formats how your mouse will look like when you hover over the submit button. So I guess when you put pointer, you have this kind of hand, what do you call it? This hand pointing thing. Okay, so next is I want to add a background and a title to our HTML page. So let's create a section for that. So start background image. Oh, oops, I've got the exclamation mark. And then we'll create an end section as well. So arrow exclamation dash dash and background image dash dash arrow. So arrow div. So usually for although you can place background using img src, usually I like to put that in a container or a division element. So that's why I'm just going to create a division element and then put the ing inside it. So division, we'll call this background. And then we'll close with backdash div. Inside here, we can write our code for the background image. So img src, then equals to quotation, and then here's where you can paste the link. So I previously copied it already, so I'll just Control V and then paste the link here, and then class equals to quotation stretch, and then alt is the attribute of like what, in case if the link does not work, what kind of text you want to show in its place. So I'll just write background image. The point of alt is just to kind of like, let's say if in case of the host like imgur, if in case the website went down, like alt is just to kind of be a reminder, oh, what was supposed to be here, and then dash arrow. So that's our background image. What we can add next is our title and a brief description of what a palindrome is. So arrow section ID equals to, let's call it the welcome section, quotation, and then arrow, and then we can use H1, arrow, which stands for header 1, Palindrome Checker, which will be our title, and then close with arrow dash, H1, arrow, and then we'll start with arrow P, arrow, which is paragraph. So here we can just go back to our FCC and then copy the description. A palindrome is a word or a sentence that's spelled the same way both forward and backwards. So Control C and then Control V here. We'll close it with arrow dash P arrow. Whoops, low P. Why is that caps? Oh, maybe I have caps on. There we go. Low P arrow, and then remember to close our section as well. So arrow dash section arrow. And that should. So let's go back to our CSS and we'll format what we just wrote in HTML. So let's create another section up here. We'll call this let's call this general effects. So dash star star general effects, and then star dash to close, and then we'll also create a comment to end it down here as well. So dash star end general effects. So star dash, and then so I previously copied this. This is just like a link that you can copy from Google Fonts, and it just imports the font that I want to use, which is Nunito. And then we'll write our formatting for the body. So this here, body, will format essentially all the contents inside here. Do you see how like we placed all these elements within this body attribute? This will essentially format these elements. Body, and then curly bracket. So font family is Nunito, and then semicolon. Color of the font will be white, semicolon. Background color, colon will be black, semicolon. Line height is the spacing between our sentences. It's the vertical spacing between our words or sentences, so we'll use 1.4. And then width. So earlier I mentioned how down here we place or we assign width to 100%, but because these elements will be format according to body, it'll resize based on this container. So our width will, I'll adjust it to 500 pixels, semicolon. Here, let me write a comment. Determines the width for all elements inside body. So star and then dash, and then the height 100%, semicolon, position fixed. So fixed position just means that the body will stay in the same place, regardless of the viewport, regardless of how you scroll up, down, or sideways. And then our top, let's do 15 VW, semicolon, and then left, let's do 5 viewport width, and semicolon. And then let's format our background. So hashtag background curly bracket width colon 100%, because we want our background image to well, right now we're just formatting the container of which our background image is within. So we'll just make sure that container covers the entire, what do you call it? The entire screen. So height is 100%, semicolon, position is fixed, semicolon left will be 0px, semicolon top will be 0 pixels, semicolon, and then we'll put a z index just in case. So we want our background image to always be in the back, and then all elements are in front of the background. So we'll just do -1, -1 semicolon, and then now we can format the image itself, which we assign a class of stretch. So since it's a class, we'll use period. We start with period stretch, and then curly bracket, and then we put a width of 100%, semicolon, and then height equals to auto, so it will adjust accordingly. And then what else do we have to format? Oh, so the next thing we'll format is our welcome section, which is here. So ID. Okay, so yeah, so since we use ID for welcome section, we'll in CSS we have to start with hashtag welcome dash section. So although we refer to welcome section here, the only thing I want to format is the paragraph, P. So that's why I put P right after welcome section. So yeah, so if you want to like adjust a specific element within within an element, you can refer to the ID first and then refer to that type of element afterwards. So welcome section for the paragraph for the welcome section, I want the font color to be silver, and then end with semicolon. I think that should be okay. So that's how it looks so far. But now we want to place all this into a grid, so everything is nicely kind of lined up. Or it looks more, if we place it in a grid, it'll look more symmetrical. So let's jump back into our CSS and add some formatting to make it into a grid. So let's just copy this, or no, let's copy this. Copy this, and then we'll call it start the grid setup. Grid setup. And then copy and then paste it, and then call it this one N. And then in between here, we can start writing our code. So in our HTML, we referred to our container as body grid. So let's first address that one. So period. So since it's using class, we start with period and CSS first. So body underscore grid, and then curly bracket, display grid type, and then grid dash template dash columns colon 1 FR. So FR just stands for fraction, and I want 3 columns, so that's why I'm gonna write 3 of these fractions, semicolon grid template dash rows colon, and I want 4 rows, so I'm gonna create 4 of these, semicolon, and then grid dash gap. That's just the spacing in between. So that's the spacing in between the fractions. Let's set this to 30 pixels. And then the width, I want it to be 100%. So remember again, we place these elements within our body container, which we have set to 500 px. So it's not really, it's 100% of that container. It's not 100% of the screen. So it's essentially us setting it to 100% just means that it's covering 500 pixels worth of the screen. Height is, whoops, I forgot to do semicolon. Height is auto semicolon, and then z index of 2, just make sure that the grid is out in front. And then the next thing we want to format is our text box. So period text underscore box, curly bracket grid column 1-3 semicolon. So this just means, here I'll write a comment. The syntax for this is grid column semicolon grid column start, and then dash is the element or the portion following it is the end. So grid column and the start of. So 1 means it starts here, right? But it ends at the beginning of the third one. So it'll take up two thirds of the 3 columns that we created. That's essentially what 1-3 means. Grid dash row is 1. So this just means that it starts on the first row, and then give it a z index of 2. And then the next thing we want to format is our submit button. So let's move down, and then dot, and because it starts with, and because we're using class in CSS, we'll start with period. So period submit underscore button curly bracket grid column. We want this to be in the, because up here the text box will take 2/3 of the entire grid, and for the submit button I just wanted to take up the remaining 1/3 of the grid. So that's why I put grid column 3, because this is just like the last column that I want the submit button to be located. And then grid dash row is, I want it to also be in the first row, so it'll be in the same row as the text box. So it's nicely, nicely lined up. And then z index, also a value of 2. And then the next thing we want to format is our notification segment. So because it's using ID, we will start with hashtag. So hashtag notification curly bracket grid dash column colon 1-4. So this means, similar to above, this means that it starts at the first column and it ends at the start of the 4th column. So essentially it'll take up what do you call it? The notification. Oh, so this will just take up the entire grid because we only have 3 columns. So the width of the notification segment would take up the entire width of the grid. So grid row equals to 3. So we want this to be located in the 3rd row of the grid. Z index colon 2 semicolon, and then no, sorry. For notification, this should be in the second. It should be in the 2nd row because we used yeah, these first few ones we used the 1st row. So for notification, we'll use the 2nd row. We'll also change the font size. So font size equals to 23 or 25 px, just to kind of make it large and noticeable. And then we'll make the font color cyan, just to make it more distinguished when we get the response of whether it is or it's not palindrome. Okay, and then next, and our last segment is the display word segment. So since it's using the ID, we'll start in CSS with hashtag display word and then curly bracket grid dash column colon 1 dash 3, or we can do 1 dash 4. So this will just, similar to above, it will take up the entire width of the grid. So grid dash row. So this one, since notification segment was in the 2nd row, we'll place the display segment in the 3rd row. So we'll put 3 here. Z dash index equals to 2, and then semicolon. So let's take a look. Okay, cool. So let's change the view into full page view to see that everything checks out. Stay on page. Let's save this. Save first, and then change view to full page view. Okay, here I boo underscore dang. Okay, forwards I boo dang, backwards. Nope, not the same. Therefore, I boo dang is not a palindrome. Okay, let's try I forwards I backwards I. Yes, it is a palindrome. Let's check out race car. Cool. If you guys found this video helpful, I would definitely appreciate if you guys could give it a like. And if there's something that you don't like, let me know in the comments below so I can adjust accordingly. And then do please consider in subscribing for future videos that you might find useful. Thank you again for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.